My name is Allison Grant. I am 33 years old. And the night before my wedding, I heard my own voice coming from another man's phone. I was walking toward the private lounge at our rehearsal dinner because the photographer needed Garrett and me outside before the light faded. I almost opened the door before I heard myself crying. The recording was from our kitchen months earlier. On a night when I told Garrett I was scared, marriage might slowly turn me into someone who asked permission before making every decision. I had believed that conversation belonged only to us. Then Mason laughed and called it Episode 7, Independence Crisis. Garrett laughed with him. I stayed still outside the door while someone asked if Garrett planned to keep sending episodes after we got married. Garrett answered without hesitation. Marriage should cut the material in half. Once we are married, she will stop questioning every decision. I felt something inside me go cold. For years, Garrett had been the person I trusted with the version of myself nobody else saw. I had cried in front of him, admitted fears I was embarrassed by, and said things I needed time to understand. Now I realized some of those moments had been recorded without my knowledge. Worse, they had become entertainment for his friends. My first instinct was to walk into that room and demand his phone. Instead, I stepped back before anyone could see me. My hands were shaking, but I opened my messages and typed to my younger sister. Brooke, come to the back hallway. Do not ask me anything by text. I waited near the service door, listening to the men keep talking like nothing had happened. The dining room behind me was full of family celebrating a future I no longer recognized. Then Mason asked a question that stopped me. Did you show her the list yet? There was a short silence before Garrett answered. I heard the confidence I had mistaken for steadiness. Not until after the wedding. I stared at the door, knowing whatever that list was. Garrett believed tomorrow made it easier to use. Brooke found me in the back hallway 2 minutes later. She took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told her about hearing my voice, Garrett's comment about marriage, and the list Mason had mentioned. Brooke turned toward the lounge, but I caught her wrist and told her not to confront anyone yet. I did not want Garrett's explanation before I understood what I had found. I needed to know whether this was one cruel joke or something he had done for months. Brooke followed me back to the table, where we sat as if nothing had changed. Garrett pulled out my chair, asked if I was cold, and rested a hand on my shoulder. A few minutes later, I asked Garrett if I could check the wedding update on his phone. He said it was charging in the lounge and gave me his passcode without hesitation. He had no reason to think I knew anything. Brooke came with me, and we found the phone. There was a folder organized by dates, and I opened 3 recordings. One captured an argument about money, another held a private conversation about my mother, and the third was the night I told Garrett he often made decisions before asking me. Hearing those moments saved as files made my stomach tighten. I did not need more because the dates showed a pattern. The proof sat in my hands. Then Brooke found a note titled After the Wedding. It listed fewer weekends with Brooke, joint approval for spending, no extra shifts without discussing them, no walking away during arguments, and a better attitude around Garrett's clients. Every item was about changing me. At the bottom, Garrett had written, "She will adjust once things are official." I read that sentence twice before taking pictures of the folder names and the note. Brooke whispered that we should leave, but I put Garrett's phone back on the charger first. I was not ready to run without understanding what I was choosing to leave. I looked at my sister and said, I am not marrying someone who is waiting for a marriage license to start fixing me. I went back to the rehearsal dinner with Brooke beside me and sat down across from Garrett. He smiled like nothing had changed and reached for my hand, but I picked up my water instead. Garrett still believed he was going to wake up and become my husband. Tomorrow was already settled in his mind. My mother, Diane, noticed something was wrong first. She asked if I felt sick, and I told her I needed to speak with her and my father after dinner. Before she could ask more, Garrett stood and lifted his glass. He thanked everyone for coming and said I was the person who made him want to become a better man. I looked at him while everyone smiled. Hours earlier, I might have believed every word. Now I had seen a list describing how he planned to make me easier to manage once we were married. In public, I made him better. In private, he was waiting to make me different. After dinner, I took Brooke and my parents to my hotel suite and closed the door. I told them about the recordings, the group, and the note called "After the Wedding." My father stood and said he wanted to find Garrett. I asked him to stay because I needed this decision to remain mine. My mother looked frightened and reminded me that more than 150 guests were coming tomorrow. She mentioned the deposits, relatives who had traveled, and everything already arranged. Then she stopped speaking. I watched her realize she had just repeated the exact pressure Garrett expected would keep me there. Diane reached for my hand and said she was sorry. I told them I would not disappear and let Garrett explain my decision as panic. I would meet him before the ceremony, with my family nearby, and tell him myself. I did not want revenge, but I would not protect him from the truth. That night, I sent Garrett a message asking if we could talk before everyone arrived. His reply came almost immediately, asking if this was last-minute nerves. I stared at the message for a moment. Garrett had decided what I was feeling before hearing me say it. Tomorrow, he was going to hear my answer. Garrett arrived at the hotel meeting room the next morning. I was already there in plain clothes, with my engagement ring still on. Brooke and my parents waited in the room next door. When Garrett saw I was not wearing my wedding dress, his smile disappeared. He closed the door and asked what was wrong. I did not show him the pictures or explain what I had heard. I wanted his answer before he knew what I could prove. So I asked him one question. Have you ever recorded me without telling me? Garrett said no immediately. I waited, and his expression changed. He said maybe he had recorded a few arguments because we remembered conversations differently, and he wanted an accurate record. I asked whether he had sent those recordings to Mason or anyone else. This time, he did not answer. Then the explanations started. The clips were out of context. The guys were joking. And sometimes he needed advice from people who knew him. When I asked why I had never been told, he said, I was turning something stupid into something serious. I said 2 words, Episode 7. Garrett went still. I asked about the note called After the Wedding, and he rubbed his hands over his face. He said it was only a private list of things we needed to improve as a couple. I asked why every item on the list was about me. Garrett stared at the table and said we could work through everything after the wedding. I finally understood how certain he was that getting married would end the argument before it started. I told him, that is exactly what your list says. I removed my engagement ring and placed it on the table. I told Garrett there would be no wedding today. For the first time, his calm disappeared, and he reminded me that guests were already arriving. He talked about our families, the money, the plans, and the embarrassment. He never asked what hearing those recordings had done to me. He never asked what it felt like to discover my private words had become material for his friends. He was worried about the wedding he was losing. I stood up, left the ring between us, and walked out. The wedding was canceled before most of the guests reached the hotel. My parents told relatives there had been a serious breach of trust and that I would not be discussing details. I did not play the recordings or show anyone Garrett's list. I had already spent enough time being observed without my permission. Garrett began telling people a different version within hours. According to him, I had panicked over a few private jokes between friends. He said the recordings were harmless and that I had misunderstood why he kept them. I expected him to minimize what happened. But 3 days later, Caleb Sutton contacted me. Caleb had been part of Garrett's friend group for years. His message was short and uncomfortable. He said the recordings had been appearing in their group for nearly 8 months. And there was something else I deserved to know. Garrett had not only asked his friends what they thought about me, he had asked them how to handle me. When I refused a dinner with Garrett's clients, he asked whether he should push harder or, let me think, skipping it was my choice. When I wanted a weekend with Brooke, he asked how long after marriage it would take before choosing my husband over my sister became reasonable. Caleb showed me Garrett's own messages. Then I saw one about our apartment. Months earlier, Garrett had wanted us to move farther from my job, and I had resisted because I liked being close to work. In the group, he asked his friends how to make the move sound like my idea. Weeks later, he brought it up differently, and eventually I agreed. I stared at that message longer than anything else Caleb sent. Garrett had not simply shared my private moments with an audience. He had used that audience to test ways of steering my decisions, then brought those strategies home and called them conversations. Caleb apologized for staying silent. I did not tell him it was okay because it was not. I asked why he was telling me now. He said Garrett had started telling people I canceled the wedding because I was unstable, and Caleb realized the group was helping him define me again. I told Caleb to keep everything and not send my recordings anywhere else. I did not want revenge, and I did not want strangers hearing my most vulnerable moments. My voice had already had an audience I never chose. I was finally choosing who got to hear it. Leaving Garrett was easier than stopping the conversations I still had with him inside my head. I moved into a smaller apartment near work, and for the first time in years, every decision inside it belonged to me. That freedom should have felt exciting. Instead, I kept wondering what Garrett would think about choices he would never see. One Saturday, I found an old wooden chair at a second-hand store and carried it toward the register. Before paying, I heard Garrett's familiar logic in my mind. You already have chairs, so why spend money on something unnecessary? I stood there holding it until I realized I was preparing an answer for a man who was no longer part of my life. I bought the chair, but not because I wanted to prove him wrong. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Doing the opposite of everything Garrett wanted would still mean letting him influence my decisions. I wanted to learn what I actually liked when nobody else was grading the answer. Brooke invited me to a weekend furniture restoration workshop she had found nearby. I used to restore old pieces with my grandfather, but I had stopped after Garrett complained that unfinished projects made our apartment look messy. At the workshop, I met Denise Parker, who showed me how to work on the chair without rushing it. For the first time in years, I remembered how much I liked working with my hands. I wanted to sand away every scratch until the wood looked untouched. Denise stopped me and explained that restoration did not mean removing every sign that something had been used. Some marks belonged to the piece. Erasing them could damage more than leaving them alone. I did not turn that lesson into a speech about my life. I simply took the chair home and kept working on it. I started making other small decisions without imagining Garrett's response first. Some felt easy, while others showed me how deeply I had learned to seek permission. Then Garrett emailed and asked to meet. I read the message several times but did not answer that day. I was beginning to understand that recovery was not about automatically saying no because Garrett wanted yes. It was being able to choose either answer because it was mine. A few months later, I agreed to meet Garrett at a busy coffee shop. I chose the place because people were coming and going, not because I thought he would hurt me. I simply did not want a private room where he could control the shape of the conversation. When he arrived, he looked nervous. Garrett told me he had started counseling, left the group chat, and ended his friendship with Mason. He said he understood how often he had treated my boundaries like problems to solve. He did not ask me to forget the recordings. Instead, he asked for one chance to show me he had changed. I listened without interrupting him. The strange part was that I believed change might be possible. Garrett could become honest, learn why he needed his friends' approval, and stop treating love like management. None of that meant I had to be there while he did it. I asked him one question. If I had never heard those recordings, would you have stopped on your own? Garrett started to answer, then caught himself. He looked down at his coffee and stayed quiet long enough that I knew he was considering the truth instead of the safest response. Eventually, he said. Probably not. I appreciated the honesty, even though it hurt more than another excuse would have. He had not stopped because he understood the harm. He stopped because I discovered it and walked away. Garrett said he loved me and wanted another chance. I told him I hoped counseling helped him become the person he wanted to be. His face softened, as if he heard an opening in my words. Then I told him his growth did not create an obligation for me to return. He asked whether I had ever really loved him if I could leave so completely. I told him I had loved him enough to spend years explaining away things that made me uncomfortable. I was done confusing endurance with devotion. Loving someone did not require giving them access to me. I stood, picked up my coat, and told him I wished him well. Nobody in the coffee shop noticed when I walked away, and Garrett did not follow me. There was no applause and no victory. For the first time, I ended a conversation without needing the other person to agree with my decision. That mattered to me. A year after I canceled the wedding, I finished restoring the small wooden table I had worked on for months. One shallow scratch still crossed the top, and I decided to leave it there. Brooke touched it and said the old me would have spent 3 more days making it disappear. I smiled and told her, probably. Not anymore. That change showed up elsewhere too. At work. I became clearer when I said no, without turning every boundary into an apology. I did not become colder or stop caring what other people needed. I simply stopped believing that someone else's disappointment meant I had done something wrong. My mother changed in quieter ways. When I declined a family obligation one weekend, Diane did not ask what everyone would think. She asked whether I needed help and accepted my answer when I said no. That small moment meant more than any speech could have. For a long time, I thought Garrett had taken my confidence. Eventually, I understood that what he damaged was my trust in my own experience. He taught me to question whether my discomfort was reasonable before allowing myself to feel it. Getting my voice back meant learning I did not need permission to name what happened to me. I still have that table, scratch and all. It reminds me that something does not have to return to perfect condition to deserve a place in your life. A healthy relationship can include disagreement, compromise, and difficult conversations, but it should never require you to become easier to manage. If this story made you think about a boundary you once ignored, share your thoughts in the comments. Like and share this video, and subscribe for more stories about relationships, dignity, and finding your way back to yourself.